Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy is set to table a fall fiscal update today with a look at how the province's books are faring amid the impacts of U.S. tariffs. And joining us live with more on this, on the fiscal statement, is journalist and founder of the Queen's Park Observer, Sabrina Nanji. Always great to speak with you, Sabrina. What are you hearing ahead of this statement?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mini budget, so don't expect earth-shattering changes. And I think it was kind of interesting. We heard from Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy did a bit of a pregame at Queen's Park with reporters yesterday, right on the heels of the federal budget. He said, the federal budget was more tinkering than transformational. I think we might actually end up seeing that same kind of theme from the province today. But a couple of things I'll be looking closely at. One is the deficit. This is essentially an update on the province's books, our fiscal situation. We know that the tariff war with Donald Trump and the U.S. has really hit Ontario hard compared to a lot of the other provinces. And so I'm curious to see if the path to balance is still what the Ford government believed it would be in the spring. They said that would happen by fiscal 2027-28. But the budget watchdog, the Independent Financial Accountability Office of Ontario, has sort of, poured cold water on that. They do not see that happening until beyond 2030, with the deficit just ballooning. The FAO says that that's because of increased health spending that will come, and also a lack of, or I guess not as much revenue coming into government coffers. So I'll be paying close attention to that. And one other thing that, might not be the headline of the day is the legislation that comes along with the budget. So not just the document itself, but the actual fine print that we're going to see when the finance minister tables the bill that goes along with the FES around 1 p.m., just shortly after 1 p.m. And that's because we've heard that the legislation that coincides with some of the electoral changes, scrapping fixed election date laws, raising individual donations to $5,000, we'll see the fine print of that in this, budget omnibus bill. And so I'll be poring over closely to see if there's any bugaboos in there for opposition critics and for the public.
And circling back to what you just talked about earlier in terms of what the finance minister said yesterday, that the budget wasn't necessarily transformational. He also said that it fell short in a couple of key areas, specifically when it comes to the auto sector and nuclear. What are you expecting to hear in the economic statement regarding those sectors?
Yeah, I mean, the Ford government itself has been talking a big game about shoring up businesses, a ton of infrastructure spending. They see this as, one of the levers that they can pull on to, strengthen Ontario's economy in the face of these tariffs and maybe give some certainty to some of these industries. I will say that one big question mark for the auto sector in particular is that while companies like Stellantis and GM have gotten billions of dollars in government subsidies, both federally and provincially, to build EVs and parts and everything that comes with an EV on this side of the border. We have heard stories about them moving to the States. And so I think that, I'm not sure what we'll actually see tangible in today's mini budget, but I do think that's something that the Ford government has to address in terms of providing some certainty in this really precarious situation for the auto sector and for businesses at large.
Yeah, you have to admit that there's, a lot of obstacles that the province has had to try and maneuver when it comes to trying to prepare their economic outlook at a time when you had a government that was just formed back in April. They're navigating through a trade war. They just got the budget. So all of these things are all coming at once. It can't be easy to try and, to plan for the future when you have especially all this uncertainty because of the trade war.
Yeah, and I think that, we have seen from Bethlenfalvy in the past where he lays out a couple of scenarios. We're going to get to balance and get back in the black if the economic situation is rosier, and what it's going to look like if it's a little bit more pessimistic. And so I wonder if they will lay out some of those different scenarios. But you're right, this is just a lot of uncertainty at this time, and when that is usually the case, we have, like, around COVID times, obviously there was a lot of uncertainty then too. We have seen this government boost their contingency funds, and so we might end up seeing that become a little bigger. It's essentially a rainy day fund. But, opposition critics will say that the government uses this to sort of inflate the deficit. And then when, the next budget comes around, or if things go a little better than maybe they expected, they'll sort of use that to bring down the deficit when it's politically convenient and say, look, we've balanced the books now.
Under promise and over deliver, basically.
Exactly.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Thanks for having me.